The CEO disguised himself as a janitor to test his employees. But when he overheard a conversation in the boardroom, Marcus Blackwood stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, gazing out at the bustling cityscape below. At 58, he cut an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with a neatly trimmed salt and pepper beard framing a face etched with the lines of experience. As the CEO of Blackwood Innovations, a Fortune 500 tech company, he had spent the last 3 decades climbing the corporate ladder, sacrificing personal relationships and countless hours to build his empire. But today, something felt off. Marcus turned away from the window, his expensive Italian loafers sinking into the plush carpet as he made his way back to his desk. He lowered himself into his ergonomic chair, the leather creaking softly beneath him. His eyes fell on a framed photo, a much younger version of himself, standing proudly next to his father, Robert Blackwood, the company's founder. "What would you think of all this, Dad?" Marcus murmured, running a finger along the frame's edge. His father had started Blackwood Innovations from nothing, working tirelessly to create a company culture built on innovation, integrity, and mutual respect. But as Marcus reflected on recent events, he couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, and not for the better. A knock at the door interrupted his musings. "Come in," he called out, straightening in his chair. Sarah Chen, his longtime executive assistant, entered the room. At 45, Sarah had been with the company for over 2 decades, starting as an intern and working her way up. Her efficiency and loyalty had made her indispensable to Marcus. "Mr. Blackwood, I have the quarterly reports you asked for," Sarah said, placing a thick folder on his desk. She hesitated, and Marcus noticed a flicker of concern cross her face. "Is there something else, Sarah?" he prompted, leaning forward. Sarah bit her lip, then squared her shoulders. "Sir, I think there's something you should know. I've been hearing some troubling things from the lower floors." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Go on." "There's been talk of mistreatment, bullying, favoritism, even some accusations of discrimination. I know it's just rumors, but—" Marcus felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. This was exactly what he'd been fearing. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Sarah. I appreciate your honesty." After Sarah left, Marcus sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He had always prided himself on running an ethical company, one that treated its employees with respect. But had he become too disconnected from the day-to-day operations? Had the corporate culture his father worked so hard to build eroded under his watch? He needed to know the truth, but how? The moment employees saw him coming, they'd be on their best behavior. He needed to see things as they really were, unfiltered and unvarnished. An idea began to form in his mind. It was risky, unconventional, and more than a little crazy, but it just might work. Marcus picked up his phone and dialed a number. "Jack? It's Marcus. I need a favor, and it's going to sound strange." 2 weeks later, Marcus stood in front of his bathroom mirror, barely recognizing the man staring back at him. Gone was his neatly trimmed beard, replaced by several days' worth of stubble. His usually immaculate hair was longer, slightly unkempt, and streaked with temporary gray dye to age him further. Colored contacts turned his piercing blue eyes to a muted brown. He tugged at the collar of his janitor's uniform, the rough fabric a far cry from his usual tailored suits. A name tag reading Mike was pinned to his chest. The transformation was completed by a pair of wire-rimmed glasses and orthopedic shoes that altered his gait. "Well, Mike," he muttered to his reflection, "let's see what we can learn." The plan was simple in theory, if not in execution. Marcus would take a leave of absence, officially for a personal sabbatical. In reality, he would be working undercover as a janitor in his own company for the next month. Jack Thompson, his old friend and the head of a discreet security firm, had helped arrange everything, including a foolproof backstory and the necessary documentation. Only 3 people knew the truth: Jack, Sarah, and Marcus's son, David, who would step in as interim CEO. At 32, David was young for such a role, but Marcus had faith in him. Plus, this would be an excellent opportunity for David to prove himself. As Marcus, now Mike, drove to Blackwood Innovations in a beat-up old sedan, another touch arranged by Jack, he couldn't help but feel a mix of anticipation and trepidation. What would he discover? Had the reports of mistreatment been exaggerated, Or would he find that the company culture had truly deteriorated? He pulled into the employee parking lot, deliberately choosing a spot far from the entrance. As he walked toward the building, he observed the other arriving employees. Most hurried past without a second glance, their faces set in expressions ranging from determination to resignation. A few nodded politely as they passed, but no one engaged him in conversation. At the employee entrance, he fumbled with his new ID badge, playing up the role of the nervous new hire. The security guard, a heavy-set man with a friendly face, gave him a reassuring smile. "First day jitters, huh?" the guard said, checking the badge. "Don't worry, you'll get the hang of it. Welcome aboard, Mike." Marcus nodded, keeping his eyes downcast. "Thanks," he mumbled, shuffling through the turnstile. The employee break room was his first stop. He had arranged to meet his new supervisor there for orientation. As he entered, conversations halted, and several pairs of eyes turned to regard him with curiosity. A stocky woman with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun approached him. "You Mike?" she asked brusquely. Marcus nodded. "Yes, ma'am." "I'm Rita. I'll be showing you the ropes. Follow me." As Rita led him through the building, explaining his duties and introducing him to other members of the janitorial staff, Marcus fought to keep his expression neutral. He had walked these halls countless times, but never like this. The perspective was entirely different from ground level. He noticed things he had never paid attention to before. The worn carpeting in less trafficked areas, the flickering fluorescent light in the third-floor corridor that gave him a headache within minutes, the way some employees barely acknowledged the cleaning staff while others offered warm smiles and greetings. By lunchtime, Marcus's back ached from neprivichny physical labor, and his head spun with new information. He sat alone in a corner of the cafeteria, picking at a sandwich and observing the social dynamics around him. It was there that he overheard his first troubling conversation. Two young men in smart business attire sat down at the table next to him, engrossed in their discussion. "I'm telling you, man, Melissa doesn't stand a chance at that promotion," the first man said, leaning in conspiratorially. His companion frowned. "Why not? She's been here longer than Jeff, and her numbers are better." The first man snorted. "Yeah, but Jeff plays golf with Mr. Harrison every weekend. Trust me, it's a done deal." Marcus felt his jaw clench. Harrison was a mid-level manager he had always considered fair and impartial. Could he really be engaging in such blatant favoritism? As the day wore on, Marcus found himself growing increasingly troubled. He witnessed a senior employee berating a young intern for a minor mistake, reducing the poor girl to tears. He overheard whispered complaints about unequal distribution of workloads and resources between departments. In the IT department, he noticed a clear divide between the predominantly male senior staff and the more diverse junior employees. By the time his shift ended, Marcus's mind was reeling. This was just day one, and already he had seen enough to know that Sarah's concerns were far from unfounded. The company he had dedicated his life to building was not the bastion of fairness and innovation he had believed it to be. As he drove home in his unfamiliar car to the modest apartment that would be his home for the next month, Marcus felt a deep sense of disappointment. In his company, in his management team, and most of all, in himself. How had he allowed things to deteriorate to this point? But beneath the disappointment, a flame of determination began to burn. He had 4 more weeks to get to the bottom of this, to understand the full scope of the problems facing his company. And then, he vowed, he would set things right. Little did Marcus know, his undercover journey was about to become far more complicated and dangerous than he ever could have imagined. As the weeks progressed, Marcus, or Mike, as he was now known to his coworkers, settled into his role as a janitor at Blackwood Innovations. The physical toll of the job was considerable. His muscles ached each night as he returned to his modest apartment, a far cry from the luxurious penthouse he usually called home. But it was the emotional and psychological impact of his undercover work that truly weighed on him. Each day brought new revelations, some small, others deeply troubling. Marcus found himself becoming close to several of his fellow janitors, particularly an elderly man named Frank. "You know, Mike," Frank said one day as they were cleaning the executive floor after hours, "I've been working here for nearly 30 years. Started back when old man Blackwood was still running things." Marcus's ears perked up at the mention of his father. Oh yeah? What was it like back then? Frank's eyes took on a wistful gleam. It was different, I'll tell you that. Old Robert Blackwood, he knew everyone's name, from the top executives right down to us cleaners. Used to walk the floors every week, checking in with folks, asking about their families. Made you feel like you mattered, you know? The words were like a punch to Marcus's gut. When was the last time he had done anything like that? What about now? Marcus probed carefully. Things must have changed a lot since then. Frank's expression darkened. You can say that again. These days, most of the bigwigs don't even look at us. It's like we're invisible. He sighed heavily. But I suppose that's just how it goes. Company gets bigger, people become numbers. As the days went by, Marcus witnessed firsthand the truth of Frank's words. He saw how the cleaning staff, security guards, and other support personnel were often treated as if they were part of the furniture. But it wasn't just the lower-level employees who were suffering. In the marketing department, Marcus overheard a group of young employees discussing their frustrations with their manager, a woman named Karen. I swear, if I have to stay late one more night because Karen can't manage her time, I'm going to lose it, one young man grumbled. Tell me about it, his colleague agreed. And heaven forbid you try to suggest a new idea. She shuts you down before you can even finish a sentence. I heard she's only in that position because she's friends with someone in upper management, a third person chimed in. Nepotism at its finest. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He had personally signed off on Karen's promotion just 6 months ago, based on glowing recommendations from her superiors. Had he been so out of touch that he'd missed such glaring issues? But it wasn't all negative. In the R&D department, Marcus was heartened to see a team of diverse employees working together seamlessly, their excitement palpable as they discussed a new project. Their manager, a woman named Dr. Yara Nasser, seemed to have created an environment of mutual respect and innovation that reminded Marcus of the company's early days. Curious to learn more, Marcus lingered in the area, emptying trash cans and wiping down surfaces as he eavesdropped on their conversations. Great idea, Tomas, Dr. Nasser said warmly to a young intern. Why don't you flesh that out and present it to the team tomorrow? I think you might be onto something. The intern's face lit up with pride, and Marcus couldn't help but smile. This was the kind of leadership he had always strived to encourage. As he was leaving the R&D department, Marcus accidentally bumped into a hurrying employee, causing both of them to stumble. Watch where you're going, you idiot, the man snapped, brushing past without a second glance. Marcus was about to respond when Dr. Nasser's voice rang out. Mr. Peterson, that is not how we treat our colleagues, regardless of their position. I expect you to apologize immediately. The man, Peterson, looked shocked for a moment before mumbling a reluctant apology. As he slunk away, Dr. Nasser approached Marcus. I'm so sorry about that, she said, her voice filled with genuine concern. Are you all right, mister? Mike, Marcus supplied, touched by her consideration. And yes, I'm fine. Thank you for stepping in. Dr. Nasser smiled warmly. Of course, we're all part of the same team here, Mike. Never forget that. As Marcus continued his rounds, his mind was awhirl with everything he had observed. The contrast between departments was stark, and it was clear that the company culture varied wildly depending on individual managers. One afternoon, while cleaning the HR department, Marcus overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. Look, we can't keep ignoring these complaints, a woman's voice said urgently. The allegations against Mr. Harrison are piling up. If this gets out, it could be a PR nightmare. I understand your concerns, Linda, a male voice responded, but Mr. Harrison is a key player. He brings in our biggest clients. The board won't want to rock the boat. So we're just supposed to let him keep harassing female employees? This is exactly the kind of thing that the Me Too movement is fighting against. Keep your voice down, the man hissed. Look, we'll give him another warning, maybe arrange some sensitivity training, but unless one of these women is willing to go on record, our hands are tied. Marcus felt sick to his stomach. Harrison, the same manager he'd heard accused of favoritism weeks ago, was now the subject of harassment allegations, and HR was actively working to bury the issue? This was beyond unacceptable. That night, As Marcus nursed his aching back in his temporary apartment, he found himself facing a moral dilemma. He had promised himself he wouldn't intervene during his undercover stint, that he would simply observe and gather information. But could he really stand by and allow such blatant misconduct to continue? He was so lost in thought that he almost missed the knock at his door. Confused, he wasn't expecting any visitors. Marcus cautiously approached the door and opened it. His heart nearly stopped when he saw who was standing in the hallway. "Hello, Mike," said David, Marcus's son and interim CEO. "I think it's time we had a talk." The look on David's face made it clear his cover was blown. As Marcus ushered his son into the apartment, he realized that his undercover journey had just taken an unexpected and potentially volatile turn. What Marcus didn't know was that this confrontation with his son was about to set in motion a chain of events that would shake Blackwood Innovations to its very core. The small apartment seemed to shrink as David entered, his presence filling the room with an almost palpable tension. Marcus gestured for his son to sit, but David remained standing, his arms crossed over his chest. "How did you figure it out?" Marcus asked, breaking the uncomfortable silence. David's lips twitched in a humorless smile. "Give me some credit, Dad. I've worked alongside you for years. Did you really think a beard and some old clothes would be enough to fool me?" Marcus sighed, suddenly feeling every one of his 58 years. "How long have you known?" "About a week," David replied. "I saw you in the cafeteria. The way you were observing everyone, it was so you." He paused, his expression softening slightly. "Why, Dad? Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me what you were doing?" The hurt in his son's voice was unmistakable, and Marcus felt a pang of guilt. "It wasn't about trust, David. I needed to see things as they really are, without any filters or preconceptions. If you had known, you might have acted differently, influenced things without meaning to." David considered this for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I understand that. But do you have any idea how reckless this is? If the board finds out—" "The board isn't going to find out," Marcus interrupted firmly. "Not unless we tell them." "We?" David raised an eyebrow. Marcus leaned forward, his eyes intense. "Son, I've seen things, heard things. The company your grandfather built, the company I thought I was leading, it's not what we believed it was." Over the next hour, Marcus shared everything he had discovered during his weeks undercover. David listened, his expression growing increasingly troubled. "This is a lot to process," David said finally, running a hand through his hair. "What are you planning to do?" Marcus stood up, pacing the small room. "That's what I've been trying to figure out. Some issues can be addressed easily enough. Better training, clearer policies. But others, the harassment allegations against Harrison, the systemic discrimination in some departments, these require more drastic action." David nodded thoughtfully. "I've actually been looking into some of those issues myself. There's more, Dad. Things I've uncovered while acting as CEO." He hesitated, then forged ahead. "I think there might be some financial irregularities. Nothing I can prove yet, but some of the numbers don't add up." Marcus felt his stomach lurch. "Financial irregularities? Are you saying someone's embezzling?" "I'm not sure," David admitted. "But something's not right. I've been discreetly looking into it. But whoever's behind this, if there is someone behind it, they're good at covering their tracks." The two men fell into a heavy silence, the weight of their discoveries pressing down on them. "We need to tread carefully," Marcus said at last. "If what you're saying is true, we could be dealing with more than just bad management or toxic workplace culture. This could be criminal." David nodded grimly. "So what's our next move?" "I need to finish what I started," Marcus replied. 2 more weeks as Mike the janitor. But I'll need your help, son. Keep digging into those financial records. And watch your back. If someone is embezzling, they won't take kindly to being discovered." As David left the apartment, both men felt the gravity of the situation settling on their shoulders. The future of Blackwood Innovations, and possibly their own safety, hung in the balance. The next day, Marcus returned to work with renewed purpose. He was more alert than ever, knowing that he wasn't just looking for signs of a deteriorating company culture anymore. He was potentially on the hunt for criminal activity. His first stop was the accounting department. Under the guise of changing the trash bags and wiping down surfaces, Marcus kept his ears open for any unusual conversations. It didn't take long before he overheard something intriguing. "I'm telling you, these invoices don't make sense," a young accountant was saying in a hushed voice to her colleague. "The amounts are way off for what we typically pay this vendor." "Keep your voice down," her colleague hissed. "Remember what happened to Jake when he started asking questions?" The first accountant paled slightly. "You don't think—" "I don't think anything," the colleague cut her off. "And neither should you, if you know what's good for you." Marcus's mind raced. Jake, he vaguely remembered an accountant by that name who had left the company abruptly a few months ago. At the time, he hadn't thought much of it. Now, he wasn't so sure. As the days passed, Marcus found himself piecing together a disturbing puzzle. It wasn't just one department or one issue. The problems seemed to permeate every level of the company. The once strong culture his father had built had eroded, replaced by fear, mistrust, and in some cases, outright corruption. In the break room, he overheard a group of employees from the sales department discussing their quota system. "I'm telling you, it's impossible," one salesman was saying, his voice tinged with desperation. "These targets are insane. The only way to hit them is to lie to the clients. Or find creative ways to pad the numbers," another added with a significant look. Marcus felt his heart sink. Was this what his company had become? A place where employees felt forced to lie and cheat to keep their jobs? As he made his way through the building, Marcus found himself paying special attention to Harrison, the manager accused of harassment. He noticed how female employees tensed up when Harrison was around, how some went out of their way to avoid being alone with him. It was subtle, but now that Marcus was looking for it, it was unmistakable. One afternoon, as Marcus was cleaning the executive washrooms, he overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. "The old man's getting suspicious," a voice Marcus recognized as belonging to Gerald Harding, the CFO, was saying. "We need to be more careful." "Relax," another voice replied. Marcus was shocked to recognize it as Evelyn Marsh, the head of HR. "Blackwood's too busy playing golf and attending charity galas to notice what's really going on. As long as the numbers look good on paper, he won't dig deeper." "And what about his son?" Harding asked. "The kid's not as naive as his old man." There was a pause before Marsh responded, her voice low and menacing. "Leave David to me. I have ways of dealing with nosy executives." As the door to the washroom opened, Marcus quickly busied himself with mopping the floor, his heart pounding. He had just uncovered a conspiracy at the highest levels of his company, and it seemed his son might be in danger. That night, as Marcus paced his small apartment, he grappled with the enormity of what he had discovered. The corruption ran deeper than he could have imagined, reaching all the way to his executive team. And now, it seemed, they might be targeting David. He was about to call his son when there was a knock at the door. Cautiously, Marcus approached and looked through the peephole. His heart leapt into his throat. Standing in the hallway, looking nervous and disheveled, was Jake, the accountant who had mysteriously left the company months ago. As Marcus opened the door, Jake's eyes widened in recognition. "Mr. Blackwood? What are you?" "Never mind, we don't have much time. They're after me, and if they find out I've talked to you, they'll come for you too." Before Marcus could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. Jake's face strained of color. "They're here," he whispered. In that moment, Marcus realized that his undercover mission had just become a fight for survival. As he quickly ushered Jake into the apartment and locked the door, he knew that the next few hours would determine not just the future of Blackwood Innovations, but possibly their very lives. The tension that had been building over the past weeks was about to explode, and Marcus found himself at the very center of the storm. Marcus's heart raced as he quickly ushered Jake into the apartment, locking the door behind them. The sound of heavy footsteps grew louder in the hallway outside. "Quick, into the bathroom," Marcus whispered urgently, guiding the trembling ex-accountant across the small living space. Once Jake was hidden, Marcus took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. A loud knock echoed through the apartment. "Open up! Building security!" Marcus paused for a moment, then called out in his best Mike the janitor voice. "Just a minute." He mussed up his hair, rumpled his clothes, and opened the door with a confused expression. Two burly men in security uniforms stood in the hallway, their eyes scanning the apartment behind Marcus. "We're looking for a man who entered this building without authorization," one of them said gruffly. "Have you seen anyone suspicious?" Marcus furrowed his brow, playing up his role. "Nah, haven't seen nobody. Just got home from my shift and was about to hit the sack." The security guards exchanged glances. "Mind if we take a look around?" For a heart-stopping moment, Marcus considered refusing, but he knew that would only raise suspicions. "Sure, I guess," he mumbled, stepping aside to let them in. As the guards searched the small apartment, Marcus silently prayed that Jake would remain quiet. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, the guards seemed satisfied. "Sorry for the disturbance," one of them said, not sounding particularly sorry at all. "If you see anything suspicious, report it immediately." As soon as the door closed behind them, Marcus sagged against it in relief. He waited until the sound of footsteps faded completely before rushing to the bathroom. Jake was huddled in the bathtub, his face pale with fear. "Are they gone?" he whispered. Marcus nodded, helping the younger man to his feet. "They're gone, but I have a feeling they'll be back. We need to move quickly. Tell me everything you know." Over the next hour, Jake poured out a tale that made Marcus's blood run cold. The financial irregularities David had suspected were just the tip of the iceberg. Jake had uncovered a massive embezzlement scheme, siphoning off millions of dollars from company accounts through a complex web of fake vendors and inflated invoices. "It's not just Harding and Marsh," Jake explained, his voice shaking. "Harrison's in on it too, and at least 3 other executives. They've been running this scheme for years, right under your nose." Marcus felt a wave of shame wash over him. How could he have been so blind? "But why did they start targeting you?" he asked. Jake's eyes darted nervously to the door. "I found evidence linking the embezzled funds to offshore accounts. But before I could bring it to you, Marsh found out. They forced me to resign, threatened my family if I ever spoke up." He paused, swallowing hard. "But I couldn't let it go. I've been gathering more evidence, trying to find a way to expose them. When they found out I was back in town." Marcus nodded grimly. "They decided to silence you permanently." A heavy silence fell over the room as Marcus processed everything he'd learned. The corruption in his company ran far deeper than he'd ever imagined. But now, armed with Jake's testimony and the evidence he'd gathered, they had a chance to set things right. "We need to contact David," Marcus said, reaching for his phone. "He needs to know." His words were cut off by the sound of breaking glass. A small metal canister crashed through the window, releasing a cloud of gas that quickly filled the room. "Tear gas!" Marcus yelled, grabbing Jake and pushing him towards the door. "We need to get out of here." Coughing and with tears streaming down their faces, Marcus and Jake stumbled into the hallway. The sound of heavy boots on the stairs told them their pursuers were closing in. "This way," Marcus gasped, leading Jake towards the fire escape. As they clambered down the metal stairs, shouts and flashlight beams cut through the night above them. They had just reached the alley behind the building when a figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking their path. Marcus's heart sank as he recognized the face of Gerald Harding, the CFO. "I'm disappointed, Marcus," Harding said, his voice cold. "I expected better from you. Did you really think you could play detective and not get caught?" Marcus straightened up, dropping the pretense of his janitor persona. "It's over, Gerald. We know everything, the embezzlement, the cover-ups, all of it." Harding's laugh was harsh. "Over? Oh no, old friend, it's far from over." He raised a hand and several more figures emerged from the darkness surrounding Marcus and Jake. "In fact, for you it's just beginning." As Marcus frantically tried to think of a way out, a sudden screech of tires filled the air. A car came barreling down the alley, scattering Harding's men. The passenger door flew open, revealing David behind the wheel. "Get in," David yelled. Without hesitation, Marcus shoved Jake towards the car before diving in himself. As David sped away, bullets pinged off the vehicle's frame. "How did you know?" Marcus asked, his heart pounding. David's eyes were focused on the road as he navigated the city streets at breakneck speed. "I've been keeping tabs on you, just in case. When I saw the security team enter your building, I knew something was wrong. As they put distance between themselves and their pursuers, Marcus quickly filled David in on everything they'd learned. David's face grew grimmer with each revelation. "We can't go to the police," David said. "Not yet. We don't know how far this corruption spreads. For all we know, they could have people in law enforcement on their payroll too." Marcus nodded, his mind racing. "We need to gather all the evidence, present it to the board and the authorities simultaneously. Leave no room for cover-ups or denials." "But how?" Jake asked from the back seat. "They'll be watching every move we make now." A plan began to form in Marcus's mind. "We go back to where this all started," he said slowly. "We call an emergency board meeting first thing in the morning. David, you'll need to use your authority as acting CEO to make it happen." David raised an eyebrow. "And then what?" A grim smile spread across Marcus's face. "Then, gentlemen, we set a trap. It's time to reveal the truth to everyone. And I mean everyone." As the first light of dawn began to paint the sky, Marcus, David, and Jake prepared for what promised to be the most important day in Blackwood Innovations' history. The stage was set for a final confrontation that would determine the fate of the company and possibly their lives. What none of them realized was that their adversaries were setting a trap of their own. As morning broke over the city, both sides prepared for a battle that would leave Blackwood Innovations changed forever. The revelations of the past night were just the beginning. The true test was yet to come, and Marcus knew that before the day was out, he would either reclaim his father's legacy or lose everything he had spent his life building. With steely determination, Marcus straightened his tie. No longer a janitor, but once again the CEO ready to fight for his company. "Let's finish this," he said, as they headed towards Blackwood Tower for the final showdown. The early morning sun glinted off the sleek surface of Blackwood Tower as Marcus, David, and Jake approached the building. Despite his outward calm, Marcus's heart was racing. Everything hinged on what would happen in the next few hours. As they entered the lobby, Marcus noted with some amusement the shocked expressions on the security guards' faces as they recognized him. Word of his arrival spread quickly, and by the time they reached the executive floor, a crowd of curious employees had gathered. Marcus strode purposefully towards the boardroom, David and Jake flanking him. As they approached, he saw Gerald Harding and Evelyn Marsh huddled in whispered conversation. Their eyes widened in surprise and barely concealed fear as they spotted Marcus. "Marcus," Harding said, recovering quickly and plastering on a fake smile. "What an unexpected pleasure. We thought you were still on your sabbatical." "Oh, I've learned quite a lot during my time away, Gerald," Marcus replied coolly. "In fact, I'm eager to share some of those insights with the board. Shall we?" As they filed into the boardroom, Marcus could feel the tension in the air. Board members murmured in confusion at his unexpected appearance, while Harding and Marsh exchanged nervous glances. Marcus took his place at the head of the table, his presence immediately commanding the room's attention. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board, I apologize for the abrupt nature of this meeting, but I assure you, what I'm about to share is of utmost importance to the future of Blackwood Innovations." He began by recounting his weeks undercover, painting a vivid picture of the company culture that had developed in his absence. As he spoke, he could see the shock and dismay on the faces of the board members. "But the rot, I'm afraid, goes much deeper than mere cultural issues." Marcus continued, his voice grave. He nodded to David, who distributed folders to each board member. "What you have before you is evidence of a massive embezzlement scheme that has been operating within our company for years," Marcus announced. The room erupted in gasps and exclamations of disbelief. Harding shot to his feet. "This is preposterous. You have no proof." "Actually," Jake interrupted, stepping forward, "we have all the proof we need." He proceeded to walk the board through the financial documents, explaining in detail how the scheme had operated. As Jake spoke, Marcus watched Harding and Marsh carefully. He saw the moment they realized they were trapped, the fear and desperation creeping into their eyes. Suddenly, Marsh made a break for the door, but David was quicker, blocking her path. "Going somewhere, Evelyn?" he asked calmly. What happened next unfolded in a blur of motion. Harding, seeing no way out, lunged across the table at Marcus. But years of muscle memory from his college wrestling days kicked in, and Marcus deftly sidestepped the attack, using Harding's momentum to flip him onto his back. Security guards, alerted by the commotion, rushed into the room, quickly subduing both Harding and Marsh. As the would-be escapees were led away, a heavy silence fell over the boardroom. It was broken by the eldest board member, a contemporary of Marcus's father, who stood up slowly. "Marcus," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "on behalf of the board, I want to express our deepest apologies. We failed in our duty of oversight, but more importantly, we failed to uphold the principles upon which your father built this company." Marcus nodded solemnly. "Thank you, Charles. But the blame doesn't solely lie with the board. As CEO, the ultimate responsibility was mine. I grew complacent, too removed from the day-to-day operations of the company. That ends today." Over the next several hours, Marcus laid out his plan for rebuilding Blackwood Innovations. It would be a long and challenging process, but as he looked around the room, he saw determination and commitment in the eyes of the board members. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Harding, Marsh, and their co-conspirators were arrested and charged. A full audit of the company's finances was conducted. Policies were overhauled and a new, more transparent corporate structure was put in place. But perhaps the most significant change was in Marcus himself. He was no longer content to manage from afar. Taking a page from his father's book, he made it a point to regularly walk the floors of every department, talking with employees at all levels. 1 month after the dramatic boardroom showdown, Marcus found himself back in the janitor's break room, sharing coffee with Frank and the other cleaning staff. "You know," Frank said, a twinkle in his eye, "for a big-shot CEO, you made a pretty decent janitor, Mike. Or should I say, Mr. Blackwood?" Marcus chuckled. "Please, Frank. After everything we've been through, I think you've earned the right to call me Marcus." As he looked around at the smiling faces of the men and women he had worked alongside during his undercover stint, Marcus felt a warmth in his chest. These were the people who formed the backbone of Blackwood Innovations, and he had almost lost sight of their importance. Later that afternoon, Marcus stood in his office, gazing out at the city skyline. David entered, carrying a stack of reports. "The latest financial statements, Dad," he said, placing them on the desk. "We're not out of the woods yet, but things are looking up." Marcus turned to his son, feeling a surge of pride. "You know, David, watching you handle the crisis, seeing your dedication to the company and its people, it's made me realize something." David raised an eyebrow questioningly. "I think it might be time for me to step back," Marcus continued. "Not completely, mind you, but I believe Blackwood Innovations is ready for a new generation of leadership. Your generation." David's eyes widened in surprise. "Dad, are you saying—" Marcus smiled, placing a hand on his son's shoulder. "I'm saying that when the dust settles, I'd like to recommend to the board that you be named the new CEO of Blackwood Innovations." The look of shock, honor, and determination that crossed David's face reminded Marcus so much of himself at that age. He knew then that the company would be in good hands. As the sun set over the city, casting a golden glow across the Blackwood Tower, Marcus felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. The company his father had built, that he had nurtured, and that his son would now lead, was back on the right path. The journey had been difficult, filled with shocking revelations and moments of danger. But through it all, Marcus had rediscovered the true heart of Blackwood Innovations, its people. And in doing so, he had reclaimed not just his father's legacy, but his own sense of purpose. As he prepared to leave the office, Marcus paused at the door, looking back at the room that had been his sanctuary for so many years. Soon, it would be David's, and a new chapter would begin. But whatever challenges the future held, Marcus knew that Blackwood Innovations would face them with integrity, innovation, and a renewed commitment to the values upon which it was founded. With a satisfied smile, Marcus turned off the lights and closed the door behind him, ready to embrace whatever the next phase of his life would bring.